No, my view is that we'll see house prices fall again next year.
Right. Now, the Conservatives are keen to get government spending under control and to reduce the national debt. What are your thoughts on this as a priority, given the nature of the current crisis? Is it so necessary for long-term stability and prosperity? In your book, you appear not to place too much importance on national deficits.
I think there's a distinction here that has to be drawn with regard to the possibility of default. When government deficits are really very high, leading to an explosion in the level of debt, markets start to get worried about the possibility that the government might actually default, let's say not honour its obligations. And that's pretty catastrophic. Then you get the terms on which government can borrow shooting up, a loss of confidence, and you end up in the sort of banana republic position. Now, we're not there yet, thank goodness, but we're not a million miles away from it. Given all that, then I think something has to be done to reduce the deficit early on. A new government, Conservative government, would I think have to do something. That's one part of the answer. The other part is that, in the end, governments can't get on top of this sort of level of deficit by raising taxes or cutting spending. It's simply not feasible. The only thing that's going to deliver the answer is economic growth. And economic growth sustained over a run of years, which will generate increased tax revenue. So what I think the Conservatives need to do, they need to do something, but I think they should concentrate their efforts actually on a plan lasting many, many years and sustained over many years for bringing the deficit down. A very sharp squeeze early on could prove to be counterproductive.
So apply the medicine, but not quite yet.
Apply the medicine in small doses, but sustained doses, so that the cure builds up over time.
People inevitably still need to eat, they need to drink, keep warm, they like to change their cars every few years, buy a bigger plasma TV screen. Can the real economy ever divorce itself from the fluctuations of the financial markets, or are they inextricably wedded for better or for worse?
Well, there are clearly pretty close links between financial markets and the real economy, but there are also periods when they behave actually quite differently. There are occasions when the markets get ahead of themselves and you have market booms, and there are also occasions when actually they don't do that well, even though the real economy is doing a lot better. Now, my own suspicion is that this time round the financial markets have done pretty well over the last 6 months or so, stonking rally in equity markets in particular. I don't think that's going to be extended, even if the real economy does better, which I think is probably likely, that although it will be sluggish, the real economy will start to grow and the recovery will build. But I don't think the equity market can build very much from where we are, because effectively it's had its boom period already. It's done it in advance of the real economy. So it wouldn't surprise me if for the next year or two, those two went in slightly different directions.
Gordon Brown, he was famously lauded as a great chancellor when things were going well with the economy. But when the crisis started, he and his supporters blamed all the events concerning the crisis on the situation beyond his control. What is your assessment of Gordon Brown's handling of the economy in the run-up to the crisis?
Well, I never believed in Gordon Brown, the great Chancellor. That's not to say that I subscribe to the alternative view, if you like the opposition view, that he's been a complete and total disaster and it's all his fault. I think you have to steer a middle course. I mean, I'm on record. I wrote articles saying during the boom period that I didn't think he was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and that in particular I didn't want to reach that conclusion at a time when the housing market was, in my view, clearly heading into bubble territory. We had massive increases in credit and indebtedness, and we had a huge deficit on the balance of payments. As I said at the time, any goon can engineer a boom in those conditions. The question is, what's it going to be like when you haven't got those conditions, or you haven't got money raining down on you from your house or from foreigners just pouring money in? And accordingly, I think what we're seeing really is a return to what could have been expected coolly, frankly, rationally a few years ago. However, he's not uniquely to blame for what's gone wrong. I mean, if you thought he was, then you would in a sense be paying him a very great compliment, because things have gone wrong everywhere from Wagga Wagga Land to Penge and back again. So his influence would have to extend all over the world. Clearly, we've had a global problem here. However, in the UK's case, because we had those circumstances, I think you'd have to say fairly that he could have been more restrained on public expenditure in the run-up to the difficulties we've now face. And if he'd done that, if borrowing had been lower and debt had been lower, then we'd be in a stronger position now to face the difficulties which aren't all to be pinned on him.
In a sort of a league table of our competitors, how well placed are we actually in terms of national indebtedness and resilience to kind of weather this storm? Say in relation to, if we take Germany as the benchmark, how well placed is the UK to come out of this the other side?
Well, in terms of indebtedness, we're actually not too badly placed, because the level of debt, at least if you believe the official numbers, which many people might not want to do, we went into this crisis with the debt level in relation to our economy not actually that high, the public debt level. But in terms of the deficit, how things stand at the moment, it's absolutely dreadful. We're right up there at the top of the league, bottom of the league if you like. We'll probably have the highest deficit next year of any developed country, maybe even of any country in the world, so a lot worse than Germany and our competitors. I think a more telling point is really how we're positioned in regard to enjoying a reasonable recovery. Now, Germany did very badly, actually, as bad or worse than Britain 6 months or 9 months ago, but she's looking a bit better now, and you'd like to think industrially she's well structured going forward. I think the key for Britain is the exchange rate, and what advantage we draw from having a very low, i.e. competitive exchange rate. I'm hopeful that that's going to mean that British exports will actually do very well over the next couple of years. If that's true, then we'll end up doing okay.
Do we still have enough to export?
Well, I think we have enough to export, yeah, and what's more, we have enough to produce ourselves rather than importing from elsewhere. I wouldn't underestimate the role of the service sector in all this. It's very striking, for instance, with regard to holidays, and the Brits are, of course, great holidayers, that this year a lot of people have decided not to go abroad and decided instead, maybe for their extra holiday, to stay at home, who enjoy the Manchester weather. And I think you're going to see this sort of thing across the board. A lot of people substituting Britain for abroad, and of course foreigners doing the same. I don't know about here in Manchester, but in London it's very noticeable. Whereas the Eurostar used to be full of Brits going to the continent, now when you go to St Pancras it's actually full of continentals coming to Britain.
Lastly, if you had to choose from amongst the world's major financial players, I don't want to put names into your mouth here, but who would you identify as the most culpable in relation to the crisis?
I think it's very difficult to come up with a single figure or country or whatever. I have to say I think that what's been most at fault in all this has been not a person or an organisation or a country, but an idea. That's to say, the idea that the markets are basically fine and you can leave them all alone. Markets always work, governments don't. And that idea has been dominant over the last 30 or 40 years. I think we're now seeing the limits to all that. Markets don't always work, and quite often they need governments to bail them out. And because of all that, they need to be tamed and controlled. As individual countries are concerned, I think the Chinese actually bear quite a lot of responsibility for what's gone wrong by building up these huge surpluses. If they'd been spending their money instead, I don't think we'd have had this crisis in quite the way we have.
Roger Bootle.
Thank you very much.